As House of the Dragon's long-awaited premiere looms, we answer all the burning questions surrounding HBO's first attempt at a Game of Thrones spin-off. With Game of Thrones having a legitimate claim to the biggest television series of all time throne, HBO was never likely to let George R. Martin's fantasy franchise lay dormant long. After experimenting with a number of different spin-off concepts, some of which got as far as filming a pilot, House of the Dragon was chosen as the first Westeros expansion pack on TV. Plenty in House of the Dragon's trailers and marketing will feel familiar to Game of Thrones fans: the Iron Throne, King's Landing, blonde folk riding dragons, etc. Yet more will feel distinctly unfamiliar: the characters, the dynamics, the political landscape. Those who've read George R. Martin's source material will be at an advantage, certainly, but watching all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones doesn't necessarily prepare viewers for House of the Dragon, which is designed to accommodate complete newcomers as well as those who've long worshipped the old gods and the new. From possible storylines and lead characters to which names are pulling strings behind the scenes. From timeline placement to the possibility of familiar faces returning. We attempt to answer all the most common House of the Dragon questions as the premiere's considerable shadow swoops overhead. Is House of the Dragon based on a book? Yes and no. House of the Dragon draws most heavily from George R. Martin's Fire Blood, which released in 2018 as the first volume in a planned 2-part exploration of House Targaryen's history. Volume 2 isn't yet published. Unlike Game of Thrones, however, Fire Blood is less a traditional novel and more a fantasy history textbook, which gives House of the Dragon more narrative leeway than its parent series. House of the Dragon will, of course, still be rooted to GRRM's A Song of Ice Fire novel series, even if not adapting them directly. How long before Game of Thrones is House of the Dragon set? House of the Dragon is a prequel to Game of Thrones, and takes place around 200 years before Robert Baratheon's death triggers the War of the Five Kings. In George R. Martin's fantasy timeline, Game of Thrones begins in year 298 AC. House of the Dragon's main narrative picks up somewhere around 103 AC, and could stretch further back via flashbacks. Whereas Game of Thrones only spanned 7 in-universe years, however, House of the Dragon will cover decades, building toward the Dance of the Dragons in 129 AC. How are House of the Dragon's Targaryens connected to Daenerys? By the time Game of Thrones reaches full swing, Emilia Clarke's Daenerys Targaryen is flying her house's flag solo. The main Targaryens in House of the Dragon are her distant ancestors, 8 generations removed. Incest complicates matters, but Paddy Considine King Viserys the First Targaryen can be considered a great-great-great grandfather to Daenerys, so his brother, Matt Smith's Daemon, would be like a great-great-great uncle. Viserys' daughter, Princess Rhaenyra, would be a great-great-great grandmother to Daenerys, 1 generation fewer than her dad, but here's where the inbreeding comes in. Daenerys' line is descended from Rhaenyra and Daemon, since niece and uncle married. So they are both Daenerys' distant grandmother and grandfather, and her distant aunt and uncle. Targaryens, are David Benioff D.B. Weiss involved in House of the Dragon? No, they are not. David Benioff D.B. Weiss served as showrunners on Game of Thrones for all 8 seasons, but suffered a rapid fall from grace after running out of source material and delivering a contentious final season. House of the Dragon's showrunners are Ryan J. Condal and Miguel Sapochnik, the latter also worked as a director on Game of Thrones. Although their influence will inevitably be felt by virtue of sharing a fictional universe, an accolade they may receive an executive producer credit for, Benioff and Weiss have no direct involvement in House of the Dragon. Is George R.R. Martin involved in House of the Dragon? Yes, he is. George R. R. Martin enjoyed a strong influence over Game of Thrones' early seasons, but gradually became less involved as HBO's adaptation grew into its own beast. By GRRM's own admission, he was out of the loop by the time Games of Thrones ended. House of the Dragon rectifies that, and Martin is credited as a co-creator as well as an executive producer. Indeed, it was George R.R. Martin who first developed the idea alongside Game of Thrones' Brian Cogman. The author's regular updates and hype building reveal that GRRM has been involved throughout House of the Dragon's development. Is House of the Dragon about Aegon the Conqueror? What about the Mad King? When Game of Thrones fans think about famous historical Targaryens, they'll likely have either Aegon the Conqueror or the infamous Mad King in mind. House of the Dragon isn't about either. Aegon the Conqueror was the Targaryen who first came to Westeros and spewed fiery terror, establishing what would later become known as the Seven Kingdoms. Aegon also established the Westerosi calendar. AC literally means after conquest, so by the time House of the Dragon begins circa 103 AC, Aegon's empire is over a century old. King Viserys the First Targaryen is the fifth ruler in this line, with Aegon dying in 37 AC, long before the spin-off's premiere. Aerys II Targaryen, known to his friends as the Mad King, was ruler during Robert Baratheon's rebellion, which leads directly into Game of Thrones. As such, his birth, reign and death all fall much later than House of the Dragon's timeline would allow, with around 150 years separation. While House of the Dragon viewers should expect the Mad King to make a cameo, Aegon the Conqueror could potentially feature in flashbacks. If not, his feats will certainly be fresher in the minds of House of the Dragon's fictional population than during Game of Thrones. Are the Starks Lannisters in House of the Dragon? Many of the most famous Game of Thrones families will appear in House of the Dragon. These include House Stark, House Lannister and House Baratheon, while George R.R. Martin's source material would also allow for the Greyjoys, Tarlys, Arryns, and more. Make no mistake, however, House of the Dragon is very much a Targaryen tale. The Starks and Lannisters take a definitive backseat to the action here, loyally obeying their dragon-riding rulers rather than plotting to overthrow them. House Lannister will be represented by the identical twins Esser Tyland and Lord Jason, both played by Jefferson Hall, while Lord Rickard Stark is mentioned in House of the Dragon trailer footage. Are there any new houses in House of the Dragon? House of the Dragon features two major houses that were either absent in Game of Thrones or might as well have been. House Hightower proves extremely influential in the spin-off, with Esser Otto acting as Hand of the King, and his daughter playing a major role in triggering the Dance of the Dragons. House Hightower still exists in Game of Thrones, eventually becoming loyal to the Lannisters, but are significantly less prominent. House of the Dragon also elevates House Velaryon to center stage. Barely seen supporters of Stannis Baratheon in Game of Thrones, House Velaryon is a major player in its own right during House of the Dragon, and is tied by marriage to the Iron Throne. Who are House of the Dragon's main characters? Paddy Considine sits on House of the Dragon's Iron Throne as King Viserys the First Targaryen. His daughter, Princess Rhaenyra, will be portrayed by Emma Darcy and Millie Alcock, young Rhaenyra. Doctor Who's Matt Smith appears as Viserys' younger brother, Prince Daemon, while Olivia Cooke rounds out House of the Dragon's central quartet as Lady Alicent Hightower, the Hand of the King's charming daughter, and a constant presence in the Targaryen royal court. Emily Carey takes over as Alicent's younger self. Lady Alicent's father, Sir Otto Hightower, is played by Rhys Ifans, familiar to the Amazing Spider-Man fans for his villainous turn as Lizard. Sir Otto serves as Hand of the King to both Viserys and his predecessor, King Jaehaerys. Watching over King Viserys from his position in the Kingsguard is Fabian Frankel's formidable Sir Criston Cole. From King's Landing onto the High Seas, Steve Toussaint appears as Lord Corlys Sea Snake Valyrian, and he's married to King Viserys' cousin, Princess Rhaenys Targaryen, a once contender to the Iron Throne who was passed over in favor of a male heir. What is House of the Dragon's story? Whereas Game of Thrones was all about the War of the Five Kings, House of the Dragon centers around the civil war of House Targaryen, leading toward the all-out conflict dubbed the Dance of the Dragons. When House of the Dragon begins, King Viserys I Targaryen sits upon the Iron Throne as unchallenged ruler of Westeros, but a violent dispute erupts over who gets the honor of succeeding him. As the king's firstborn child, Princess Rhaenyra makes her claim, but forces conspiring against her want to put Prince Aegon in the big metal chair instead. House of the Dragon will begin by exploring the circumstances of Prince Aegon's birth, and Rhaenyra's desire to be her father's successor. Is House of the Dragon as mature as Game of Thrones? Game of Thrones has an entirely deserved reputation for sex and violence on a scale that still gives TV censors nightmares. House of the Dragons won't shy away from those same elements, and Matt Smith has publicly admitted he was taken aback by the amount of sex scenes he was asked to partake in. While House of the Dragon will honor the tone set by Game of Thrones, Ryan J. Condal and Miguel Sapochnik have confirmed, via THR, that House of the Dragon's sexual scenes won't be as gratuitous, in response to the backlash Sansa Stark's sexual assault and other scenes received during Game of Thrones' run. In a Vanity Fair interview, Sarah Hess, executive producer, also promised House of the Dragon's sexual violence would be handled with far more sensitivity. How many dragons will be in HOTD? There's no point denying it, CGI dragons were a big factor in Game of Thrones' appeal, with audiences eagerly anticipating the next occasion Daenerys' three pets would burn some poor idiot who dared challenge her. As the spin-off's very title suggests, House of the Dragon will be far more generous in the fire-breathing lizard states, since the Targaryen Empire is at its peak at this point in A Song of Ice Fire's timeline, and dragons are one of their primary weapons. According to George R.R. Martin himself, House of the Dragon will have no less than 17 of the scaly beasts. Are White Walkers in House of the Dragon? No. The Long Night and Battle for the Dawn, where White Walkers first descended upon Westeros and were pushed back, happened over 8,000 years before House of the Dragon, and the creepy ice zombies won't resurface until Game of Thrones. White Walkers will be the stuff of legend in House of the Dragon, with some probably refusing to believe they even exist. Westeros still has another several centuries before it needs to start worrying about supernatural threats from beyond the wall. Are any GOT characters alive during House of the Dragon? The vast majority of Game of Thrones' main characters are mortal and, therefore, not around during House of the Dragon. Even famously wrinkly figures like Maester Aemon and the Three-Eyed Raven wouldn't yet be born during the spin-off's timeline. The only familiar face who might feature in House of the Dragon is Melisandre, whose true age is something of a mystery. Thanks to her affinity for magic, Melisandre could be anywhere up to 400 years old during Games of Thrones, which would put the Red Priestess lifetime well within the boundaries of King Viserys I Targaryen's rule. Melisandre doesn't play any part whatsoever in Fire Blood, but she's alive and available if House of the Dragon ever decides some naked shadow magic is required. Where is House of the Dragon streaming? House of the Dragon episodes will premiere on HBO and HBO Max simultaneously. For Canadian viewers, House of the Dragon will be available on Crave. When does House of the Dragon release? House of the Dragon premieres August 21st at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, PT, landing on HBO Max at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Subsequent episodes will then release weekly. How many episodes does House of the Dragon Season 1 have? House of the Dragon Season 1 is confirmed for 10 episodes, beginning with the heirs of the dragon and the Rogue Prince. Will there be a House of the Dragon Season 2? House of the Dragon Season 2 hasn't been officially confirmed, but given the money and effort HBO are putting in, plus the connection to Game of Thrones, a renewal looks incredibly likely. Early House of the Dragon reviews have proven largely positive, and the entire Dance of the Dragons chapter in Westeros history requires more than a single season to tell. Something would have to go horribly wrong for House of the Dragon Season 2 not to happen. Has House of the Dragon replaced other Game of Thrones spin-offs? HBO explored numerous Game of Thrones spin-off options before settling on House of the Dragon. One of these, Blood Moon, starred Naomi Watts and took place during the Long Night, focusing on the first battle against the White Walkers. A big-budget pilot was filmed, with S.J. Clarkson directing and Jane Goldman writing, but HBO declined to green-light a full series. According to Warner Media's Robert Greenblatt, this decision was taken after studio execs viewed the pilot. There's no suggestion House of the Dragon and Blood Moon couldn't have both entered full development had both been deemed worthy of pursuing. Instead, Game of Thrones fans are getting a Jon Snow spin-off starring Kit Harington.